They say that mining is easier today than what it was years ago. It might be easier in regards to the cutting of the coal because you've got punchers, cutters, and all the rest of it to assist you. But still, the tempo have increased. Therefore, it's more tearing. I mean, years ago, you used to go to work. If you could only fill 3 ton of coal, it was only 3 ton of coal. If you could fill 10, it was 10. But you was working to your own capability. Today, you're expected to keep up to time. Everything is worked on the clock.
Two Rhondda miners driving home from what is still a major industry in the valley. Gone forever from these streets are the coal-blackened faces, the rough working clothes, and the tramp of nailed boots that marked a shift coming home. Gone too, perhaps, with the old working methods, is the pride of craft, now replaced by the discipline and teamwork of a mechanized coalface. What used to be in hard necessity the hereditary job no longer descends from father to son. There are other jobs, and Rhondda parents have long memories.
One of our biggest problems in juvenile recruitment is from the attitude of parents who recognize the fact that before the war, for 70% of males, it was either a question of working in the mining industry or being on the dole. And whilst it's unfortunate, one must recognize that this is the backcloth under which and against which we must have a recruitment program. I would believe that the vast majority of trade unions today recognize the fact in the Rhondda that they do get a fair deal from the coal industry. And I would say from the recognized leaders, it does not prejudice their attitude to the industry to any marked extent. But as a labor-dense industry, we have to have people. And our recruitment program is certainly prejudiced by the attitude of people who remember the past, which I do not believe, relative to the attitude of the board, since nationalization, is fully justified.
It's in the miners' lodges that local attitudes are still decided. In the past, these were the rallying grounds of defiance. Today, they consult with management. They deal with welfare and cases of compensation. And their vital concern is with the threat of pit closure and the fear of redundancy. Like management, they're well aware of the drift away from the pits and the daily absence, as the area manager claims, of one Rhondda miner in every 4 from his place of work.
The absenteeism has increased since nationalization from about 10% in this community to a current figure of 24. When one asks the reason why, I think this is largely a matter of opinion. By and large, the whole prosperity of the area has risen tremendously during this period. I think a big factor must be the amount of the female population which is currently in employment in Rhondda. And this increases the overall income coming into the house. And therefore, I think this tends to encourage absenteeism to some extent. One thing that I feel one must comment on, that mining is to some extent a more dangerous industry than others, and certainly the higher rate of absenteeism must in the end prejudice the safety of everyone employed underground. People moving from one job to another because of absenteeism must give rise to some lack of safety, which would not take place if people work more regularly.
Recruitment, absenteeism, safety in these pits. After nearly 20 years of nationalized coal, problems like these still have to be resolved in terms of the relations between coal board and coal miners. As union leader Will Whitehead sees it, attitudes have changed. But so too has the industrial and economic background of the collier's life.
In the past, the attitudes were very clearly defined. The enemy was the coal owner. To put it in a nice way, the devil wore a big moustache. It was possible to define him because however much he suffered, we who were employed by him suffered more. And so there was no doubt about what we had to do. We had to oppose him and try to win from him greater wages, more reforms, etc., etc. But today, you see, the enemy, if he is to be the employer, is the National Coal Board. And we, the miners, fought for nationalization, and we must defend nationalization. So the lines are not clearly drawn at all. And however much nationalisation has given us, and it has given us much, the 5-day week, the rest days, it has started on fringe benefits, given us better holidays. However much it has done, the mining industry still has to compete commercially in this country. And as a consequence, because it has to do that, it still hasn't got the money to give us the other reforms which we require. And so, rather than strike as they did in the old days, when there was no other industry about, men are choosing to leave the mining industry and go to work in much more congenial conditions in factories, mills, workshops, and what have you. So you see, there is this marked difference today. The militancy is there, but they're not called upon to use it because our alternative means of employment are available to them.
For many former miners, alternative employment means commuting to work elsewhere. Nearly half the men of the Porth and Penagraig district, for example, now work outside the valley. In Rhondda itself, 23 factories have been built since the war to provide a variety of work for women as well as men. In a clothing factory like this, special shift times have been arranged to suit working mothers. The emancipation of smaller families and the new equality of the female wage packet means the women are better off.
Oh, a lot better off. Everybody is better off. The Rhondda is better off. The factories have come here for the women to work and to earn money. The work is so much easier than in my time. And everybody is renovating up their homes and much more independent.
Today, the valley's face is changing from old chaos to new order. The drab Victorian sprawl is disappearing under a modern pattern of industry. And the character of the townships and villages that thread the long street is changing too. Villages like Cumpark, for example, where Yori Thomas lives.
Yes, I think that this village of Cumpark is a kind of a microcosm that reflects the changes that have taken place throughout the Rhondda as a whole. Now, take this pit here, dead. It's just scrap iron and junk. There were 3 pits there in this village, but only 1 is left now. And you can see this decline of the village reflected in its institutions.
The social life that was rooted in nonconformist faith, the societies based on the chapels, the big choirs, the drama groups, the meetings, sacred and secular, all have broken down into a new and looser social pattern.
There's a kind of a fragmentation. People are leaving the village, especially the young men and women. And that is the tragedy, that the young breeders, the fertile groups are going, and all that's left behind are the old hens.
Up and down both valleys, the workmen's institutes were once the keystones of a self-made and radical society. Today, they must survive on the profits of the bar and the one-armed bandit. Today, the rooms where workless men in the 30s read everything from Hansard to the Christian Herald are storage space for beer glasses and bingo cards. And in the library, the cupboards are closed. Now, no hand pulls down a book in strong support of argument. The dust gathers on those articles of faith as it seems to have gathered on what was once the ardent radicalism of Rhondda.
There are those who have held that the intense radicalism of the Rhondda belongs to the days of the have-nots, and that the socialism which was practiced in those days had its roots in Methodism. I believe that both went together. Men were both religious and socialists at the same time. Today, there are people who wonder whether they've got either their socialism or their religion.
And along the streets of Rhondda stand the chapels, islands isolated now in a sea of materialism.
They're there. They're like empty shells. In fact, they dot the landscape of this valley like extinct volcanoes. These large barrack-looking austere buildings are empty. And there you have the transformation that has taken place.
Yr arglwydd sydd yn gwneithio'r cyfiawnder a barn i'r rhai gorthrymedig oll. As bysodd o'i ffyrdd i Foses a'i weithred oedd i feibion Israel. Trigarog a graslon yw yr arglwydd, hwyr frydig i lyd a mawr o drigarogrwydd. It is true that they are no longer volcanic, but I do not think that they are in any way becoming extinct. If the valley is to survive in any cultural, political, and religious sense, there surely must be a burning again of the old volcanoes.
With dwindling attendance and an aging membership, the chapels that could between them seat Rhondda's entire population now echo no more with a packed chorus of praise and worship. Some are shut, some sold to very different use. But some, like Nazareth at Pennagraig, have been rebuilt to a social purpose.
I like actually the situation of one or two churches that have been sold to the Rhondda Council, where the development is a communal development, where chapels are used for definitely new ways and new means of expression. And I think that the churches failed to realize that a part of its message was to enter more fully into the community.
Those churches that have been changed, say, to voluntary centres or old people centres, whatever they are, community centres, they have been organised with a body that has capital. They can use money to that purpose.
Nothing from Rhondda's social and cultural history has survived more strongly than the urge to be educated and to educate others.
This was formerly a colliery site, derelict for many years afterwards, and the people have been inclined to look at this place as if it's abandoned, something like the valley itself. But no, what has happened is that on this old, disused site, a miracle has taken place. An imaginative modern school to meet the needs of the modern child. This school has arisen so that the children can have all kinds of education to suit not only what the Rhondda needs, but what the world at large is looking for. We are trying in the school to get parents to think that there are opportunities not only in the valley but outside. They know that apprenticeships of varying kinds are awaiting their children just outside the valley. That's going to break down the idea that the Rhondda's parochial and that we are inbreeding. We hope that this school is an attempt to grow up educationally as well as reach out to the modern world.
Much of Rhondda's schooling is still housed in the old formal style, but well over a third of these children go on from junior school to grammar school, urged on by parents and by long tradition.
Rhondda people felt that education was a kind of ladder which allowed them to climb out of the pit. Unfortunately, at this time, the educational system was largely self-generating. The products of the system led back into education and nowhere else. So that Rhondda produced teachers. There was little opportunity for anything else. Now, however, industry, the professions, government service woo the sixth former with attractions which teaching cannot equal. The pull is now from a broad front.
In the language laboratory of a Rhondda grammar school, these youngsters are a long way from the darkness and danger their forefathers knew at the same age. Today, they are heirs to a new and much more equal society.
I have 500 boys in the school. Their parents come from all walks of life. The boys themselves are not conscious of differences in wealth, differences in social position. They are conscious only of differences in ability, differences in capacity for work, and excellence in games.
And sixth form Rhondda is conscious too of the need to argue and to look critically at its formative background of valley life.
The basic snag of existence here is the fact that we are all still under the rather vicious thumb of the Puritan nonconformity of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. We are still held by reactionary forces.
Yeah, I don't think this has any real effect on us today. I know there's no effect, very little effect on me. I don't think it's going to have
the damage which this growing up under these stifling influences has already been done. I should say we'll all go from here, and whether we like it or not, we are going to have a Puritan background. Whether we like it or not, we've got it ground into us.
I think this conformity, this great sense of conformity, is a snag in a way. You take it now, well, since the time of the Depression anyway, the Rhonddas returned to Parliament at each election a socialist candidate with an overwhelming majority, even though the Rhondda tends to be conservative. Well, what I mean, we can only, conservative in outlook, not conservative in politics, yes. That we can only attribute this to this sense of conformity, this sort of follow the herd idea.
And it doesn't matter who the Labour Party puts up for election, they can stick a Dalek there for all that, but he'll get the Parliament.
But this conformity, this single way of life in a mining valley, is breaking down into diversity. To Ron Berry, it will die as memory dies of the sour industrial past.
Oh, I'm sure the fag end of racial memory exists now, you know, in probably in the council chambers and in pubs, in clubs, among people of my generation and a little older, perhaps. It's a nasty taste in a lot of people's mouths, probably, but I'm sure it'll die, I'm sure it'll fade away, as the history of the Rhondda itself is fading away, you know. Which isn't to say that these things, when they occurred, weren't vital, because the Rhondda obviously gave a social impetus and gave social values to industry throughout the whole world, probably.
These valleys and the life in these streets have inspired many writers, but few artists. One of them, Ernest Zabole, has come back to his native valley to live and to paint. As he says, coming back here was like climbing back into a warm bed.
Briefly, it's the place which interests me rather than the people. But then that's not quite right, because you can't help thinking of people, the people who inhabit Rhondda streets, when you look at these streets. Well, this is one painting that I've made, which has been influenced by the Rhondda. Although I've been interested in form again in doing this thing. And in the painting here, there is the horizon at the top and bottom, with the center of the valley, as it were, down through the middle. Towards the center, there is a street with a person, and there are windows through which you can see people, some in bed, some just looking out. And the whole thing, I hope, is something woven, which gives you an idea of the valley.
Right, gentlemen from the middle section after the chord of F minor.
Even the traditional repertoire of the male choirs is breaking with past conformity. Pendiris, one of Rhondda's two big choirs, rehearses in a schoolroom under Glyn Jones and exults in Latin in a mass by Perosi.
But again, watching the endings and giving me good, clear tones. Right, Brian, when you're ready.
ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, please. The boy with a voice for the future, Mr. Desmond Reese. Thank you.
Saw me crying in the chapel. The tears I shed were tears of joy.
The new affluence, which is now a characteristic of the valley, is developing its own institution and making the clubs a place of grandeur and likewise a place where they can turn in, they can sit down, they can talk, they can speak, they can sing. All their interests actually are being provided for them. Here is a tremendous change. The club today as a center of the communal life and the church as it were perishing on the circumference.
Legs 11, walking sticks 77, 8 and 3 83, bed and breakfast 2 and 6, 7 and 1 71, 3 and 2 32, key of the door 21.
Across the new pattern of Rhondda life, the old pattern of death strikes savagely and suddenly. Along the silent streets, the dead miners of Cambrian are escorted to their long home, and Rhondda watches in shocked anger that it could have happened again in 1965. One by one, the latticed memorials of past labour are stripped and felled. In 1913, there were 53 pits in Rhondda. Today, there are 6, and an economic question mark hangs over each of them. In the days when pit wheels turned, or failed to turn, at the end of every street, there was often little to buy in the shops, and often nothing to buy it with. Today, shop windows match the shopping purse, and the cafes share this affluence. Instead of pop and pies and politics, there are menus now of distinction. In Rhondda, there's money to spare for most of the pleasures. Housing is still a major concern for the borough. The long lines of aging houses, though painted and refurbished with pride, are too small for easy conversion. New flats and new council estates are building, high on the hilltops above the valley, in a cleaner air perhaps, but a cooler social climate than that of the terraces along the river. The Civic Trust has proposed a new centre for Rhondda, where the two valleys meet at Porth, and says the next generation must have an environment to match the dramatic change from the past. But to a generation like Will Mainwaring's, much of the future lies elsewhere.
From the mining angle, there is no future in the sense that we knew Rhondda. The question of suitable employment is one that can only be decided outside of Rhondda itself. Call it a dormitory town, if you like. But there must be suitable employment provided within easy traveling distance. And in that way, Rhondda can have a long history.
At the mouth of the last private level in Rhondda, we are looking back into history. This is how it all began. When and how will it end? Despite pit closures and the threat of more closures to come, this is the future as Gerald Blackmore sees it.
I believe the future of the valley is not suspect in terms of the market for coal. South Wales is particularly fortunate in the very high grades of coal, which were laid down many, many millions of years ago, and therefore I believe they will always be in demand. As far as Rhondda is concerned, we are rich in coal for many, many decades to come, if we have the manpower to work it.
These are independent miners, 5 men who work this level as a private venture. They admit they're making a good living out of it, but even they are pessimistic about the future of coal in Rhondda.
Well, I'll give you my opinion. Mining came into this valley the way we're mining it via. And I think that's the way it's going to go out. It came in levels, and it's going to finish with a level then. I think this will be the last in the valley. I don't think the valley itself has got long to go. I wish it had a good future, but I think the coal owners took the best of it. It's gone.
Perhaps, as these men claim, we're near the twilight end of the Rhondda miners' day. But for the long street that is Rhondda, surely it's only the end of the beginning. Perhaps Will Whitehead speaks for most of Rhondda when he says,
"My view, for what it's worth, is that there will be limited employment in the Rhondda, limited population, a much more beautiful place to live in, and much the same in terms of debate and argument as went on before."
Next on 2W, a special Sport Wales remembering Ray Gravel.